Hello and welcome to the Golfing Greenkeeper podcast. For those newcomers and for those seasoned veteran listeners of you out there, my name is Steve Smith. I am your host and I've hit a bit of a milestone. This is I've hit number 50. 50 podcast episode. Thank you to everyone out there for listening. I can't believe I've made that half-century milestone. It's been an incredible journey so far, and I hope you've enjoyed everything along the way. And those of you that are new to the podcast, listening out there, you've only got 49 behind this one to listen to play catch up. So I wish you well. But look, today I've got a new interview on the podcast. It's gonna come under the design brief. This episode, I think the segment, the design brief, is appropriate for this one, but there's also a little bit of history, so there's a little bit of, maybe it could come under Aussie golf history as well, but I think we'll stick to the design brief. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this interview. And in lead-up week to the Masters, which is happening over in the States, in this podcast, we're also going to talk about the Augusta of Australia. Yes, that golf course gets a mention as well, and if you're not sure, you'll have to listen to find out. Come along with me for the ride. This is episode number 50. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to the Golfing Greenkeeper podcast, where I have, a very different guest on the podcast this time. I'm quite excited about it because it delves into a bit of the fun side for me and the interest of golf course architecture design, and there's a little bit of some interesting golf courses in the background. And I think you're going to enjoy this journey. There's probably a little bit of history too there, without being rude to the person that I'm introducing as well. But I have on the line to talk to on this segment of the podcast, it is Ted Stirling, former golf professional. I think I can say former, and golf course architect. Welcome along, Ted, to the podcast.
Good day, Steve. Nice to hear your voice again, and hope you're well and everything. I'm glad you say past golf pro, because I'm probably too old to be a golf pro anymore. That's about it.
I don't mean that in a rude way, and I certainly don't. I hope you don't take it the wrong way at all.
No,
I think
not at all.
It's been a while.
Yeah, the head seems to think I'm still a golf pro, and the body doesn't. That's what happens.
I'm sure that will never change either. Just quietly.
Yeah, you're probably right there.
It's look, and to introduce a little bit about who you are and how we know each other, we'll probably start off with how that happened, and that takes us back to Katoomba Golf Club, and correct. you were the professional / golf course architect of the project at the time when I started as a beaming, wide-eyed, fresh young superintendent at the age of 24 in 2004. And that's where we first met on the project that I'd stepped into and you were well already involved with at Katoomba. It seems like so long ago. We've known each other for nearly 18 odd years. Well,
I do remember being involved with Katoomba originally in 1989 with John Bruce and partners. So that's when I first got involved with it.
And that probably highlights a little bit already how long golf course developments and projects can take. They take years, don't they? And I've said it before, and I know you and I have spoken about it at length, and anyone who's in these projects from beginning to when they actually start to build and turn soil, these things don't happen in a year or two from when, they're thought of. It's years.
Well, I've never done a major project that's been completed in less than 5 years, and 5 years seems to be the stamp of approval. And every project's different, of course, but it's a long, drawn-out process from the day you start and then to the day someone's hitting a golf ball. Correct.
And there's plenty of ones that miss the mark and they don't actually end up coming to fruition from those that do. But we'll probably talk about that a little bit later on. So at Katoomba, I stepped in, young person, beaming wide-eyed, like I mentioned before, and you're already involved. It wasn't long after 2004 when I started that there were already things happening on course, and you and I suppose we had to try and work each other out in that working relationship style to get stuff done on course, because immediately I think Derby was up in a year after that, building 4 new greens and making a new par 3 and the like, and dams and all sorts of stuff was happening.
Yeah, look, every project's different. Katoomba started out the way it was because it basically had gone broke, and they couldn't sustain themselves any longer. and the council agreed to a developer's request to sell off some land, and that land was then going to be made available for a hotel site and condominiums buildings of different types and different discussions in terms of length and size. There was a guy called John Bruce, and he ran an architect's business in Sydney, John Bruce and Partners, and the guy that started Katoomba was a guy called Tracy Lake. And John Bruce and I and a bunch of other characters had a company called Golf Design Australia, and we looked into all the aspects of developing up a golf course, and Katoomba was just one. So what you see today at Katoomba is unfortunately a golf course that's since closed because it didn't work out. But 15 acres of land was sold off, and those 15 acres of land meant that there was changes needed to be done to the golf course to make it an 18-hole golf course again, hence why I was involved. I also ran the pro shop at that stage, hence when we first got involved with each other. The design of the golf course changes, the construction that took place was all part of the process to try and make the golf course as good as it was before, as popular as it was before, and to make the golf club, being the members, sustainable for the future. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, but it did extend their life at that stage.
It did, and that's a difficult proposition in the first instance, because I recall, my early time there was a lot of the chatter within the club, and there was, there's stalwarts of each club. Everyone's got them, and It's hard for those people who have put a lot of their time and lives into that club pre a development to rationalise in their heads that it was financially struggling. This was a decision that was beyond them as a club member. There's boards involved, and with Katoomba there was council. That it's hard to rationalise that there's going to be this sort of level of change, and there was substantial change happening on the golf course. So I often see, using that as an example for me, and I hear about it on plenty of other places where these things have happened, that the club members don't always agree in full. It's very, very hard to get a clear majority, let alone a majority, to agree to these sorts of large-scale changes. So it was a difficult process to go through, and it was a long, drawn-out process in Katoomba's instance, which we could speak of from experience.
Yeah, personal experience. Look, the Katoomba thing was drawn out, and I think it's worth a comment here that, look, every member loves their golf course. When a change has to happen, let's say 50% like it and 50% don't. And that's really the rationale of what happens in most golf clubs. Look, the changes at Katoomba had to happen if the golf club was going to succeed. The changes weren't the type of changes that every golf member at the club at the time thought it should be. And of course, Katoomba Golf Club had a rich history. Like, Katoomba Golf Club was really the biggest golf club operating in the mountains right through the 60s and 70s. And I played many golf tournaments there. In fact, the funny thing about Katoomba Golf Club, the last Pro-Am at the golf course, I holed in one, the 10th hole, which was a little par 3, which has since gone. So we all have memories, and I mean, it's sad to see this happen. I don't know how you avoid it, because outside influences dictate what might or might not happen. But, prior to Katoomba Golf Club, there was a Lura Golf Club, which used to be known as the Blue Mountains Golf Course.
That's right, back in its early day, yeah. In
the real early days, and then along came Katoomba and Blackheath and Lura and all these types of places. They changed their name. So, look, it's disappointing to see that there isn't a golf course there today, but, I mean, I don't know what you do. You need someone with deep pockets, a benefactor that loves the game of golf and says, look, I'll come in and help you out. And Jerry Swartz has done that at Lura Golf Club with the buying out and the holding on to the Fairmont Resort. And he's doing the same thing to make that golf course work today.
And Jerry owns a number of golf courses and properties and hotel properties around the East Coast. Certainly, I think he might even own some elsewhere in Australia as well. But like you say, you need deep pockets. You need someone who's going to be in it for the long haul, that has money to do so, and or clubs that have different ways of coming up with a similar arrangement. And one that springs to top of mind, certainly in Australia, is Peninsula Kingswood, of how two clubs sort of amalgamated, two golf clubs amalgamated, sold one property off. And I don't know the full detail in depth about how it went about, but we've got this incredible renovated 36-hole facility down there at what is now Peninsula Kingswood, down the Sandbelt of Melbourne. And that's a different way, and that's with clubs doing it. So there's plenty of different ways to go about this type of business, and build a long-term future for a golf club, a renovated golf club, redesigned golf courses. There's so many different ways of doing it, but it doesn't always come out looking all roses, does it?
No, look, every job has got a different clientele. Every job has a different result, and some are better than they started, and some are worse than when they started. But there is a number of golf clubs that have amalgamated themselves in Victoria, Melbourne. Right next door to Peninsula Golf Club is Long Island Golf Club, and it's been amalgamated with, I think, the National.
Yeah, it's under the banner. Yeah, there's 4 courses now, 4 courses.
Yeah, so and it's working quite well. And I mean, a place like Long Island, it was built by an architect who was involved with the boating industry. So I presume he was a marine architect, not a golf course architect, but he built that golf course, which was originally a racetrack. And in that era, and at that period of time, the course next door, which was Peninsula Golf Club, which was then in those days just an 18-hole golf course, with a little 9-hole extra golf course, which they called the Ladies Club, or the Ladies Course. And so everything develops on. I mean, Peninsula Golf Club has been, a standalone type facility, a residential outside of Melbourne, very popular, a tough golf course, and it continues today. And the boys that have done the work down there have done an excellent job. I mean, you've got to commend them. It's fantastic result. Fantastic.
Oh, the OCCM design is just mind blowing.
Yeah.
Having been down there and seen it and experienced the new version of the new Peninsula Kingswood 36 holes, it is something to behold. But that probably brings me nicely to your early career. You're from Melbourne, originally, growing up there, getting a taste for the game in and around the Sandbelt, becoming a professional. You spent time at Peninsula and the old course before the location of the 36 holes that there is today, that was designed by Sloane Morpeth originally, before they moved to that site. So you were at Peninsula in your early days as a trainee, is that right? Before moving to Kingston Heath?
Correct. Yeah. Do you want me to go back before that, or do you want me to run straight into...
Well, let's hang on. It could be a very long podcast if we go back to.
I'll do it as quickly as possible, I suppose. Look, I was born in 1946, so by the time I was 10, I was a member at Elsternwick Golf Club. And Elsternwick Golf Club was the original golf course of Kingston Heath, which I then finished up being the pro at, which was really weird. But for some reason, I was attracted to golf because there was no one in my family that was a golfer. My father was a builder. Literally a full-time fisherman, and he was a champion snooker, or basically billiards player more than snooker. So I don't even know how it happened, but I lived near Elsternwick Golf Course. I was born in Elsternwick, and I lived in Caulfield, and it was just sort of the thing you did as kids. And I think, like all children, you tend to take on the sport that you like. So I went to golf, and from golf, you start to learn about different things. Then schooling came along. I wanted to be a golf pro or play golf. My father wanted me to be an architect. I can remember going to Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology to do architecture, but I spent a lot of time at Melbourne University. And while I was at Melbourne University, I got involved with some characters that had access to aerial photographs. And for some reason, I've always had a love of aerial photographs, contour maps, and things of that nature. And Melbourne University.
Is that something that I know I do? I know I've always, we were, at Katoomba, I still do it today. I look at aerial photographs. I just sit there and study Google Earth. I look at Google Maps. I just look at, the old road atlases, and I've been fortunate to travel around the country when I was much younger with the family, and I was always navigating the maps. But like you, that concept of studying things, on a vast space, but looking at the detail of it and the lay of the land, I find that a lot of people that enjoy architecture, and certainly golf course architecture, that enjoy the sport of golf, have a fascination with those types of things as well. Anyway, so there you go.
Yeah. I don't know whether I can comment much on that because I don't know where it came from, but I certainly had a love of it. I can remember the first aerial photograph I actually saw at Melbourne University, which was at Commonwealth. And I thought the shape and the size of these bunkers were unrealistic. And when I went to Commonwealth and looked at these things, I couldn't understand why the contours didn't marry up with what was on the ground. And of course, the contour map is only a guide. And of course, that gets into the golf course design thing, that if you're not on the ground, moving the soil around, watching what your eye is telling you, you tend not to get that perfect, what you think is the perfect remark from other people when they see the finished product. But look, getting back into the golf thing, I was a member at Elswick, which as a kid, and then by the time I was 14 and a half, I joined Huntingdale Golf Club. And at 14 and a half, you weren't allowed to be a member of a golf club until you were 16. So I used to get my sandwiches from the back door in the kitchen because I really wasn't allowed in the clubhouse. But I thought it was a great thing. I had a sister that lived in Sandringham, and they had friends at Victoria Golf Club, so I played an awful lot of golf at Victoria Golf Club at the same time. And I was also in the I suppose the late 50s it would have been, maybe the early 60s, certainly the late 50s. There was a cadetship thing at Royal Melbourne, so I played an awful lot of golf at Royal Melbourne.
You're only making it sound easy. I played at Victoria, RM, Huntingdale, Kingston, Commonwealth. Geez, you're rattling them off like but they were your backyard, weren't they?
Yeah, and to further on to that conversation, I just thought that was normal. I had no knowledge that these golf courses were seen by a lot of people as, outstanding, great world champion stuff and all that business. I don't know. But, I mean, I played really most of my golf at Victoria, even when I wasn't a member. For some reason, where we just all got together as kids and you played, we used to hit off at the 10th hole of Victoria Golf Club and go 10, 11 and 12 and then play across the road onto the 17th green at Royal Melbourne, up the 18th, and there was a wonderful lady at Royal Melbourne who used to make her own bread and jam, and we'd go in there and have the cup of tea.
These are the stories of the old days that I sit there and I think about and I go, how good would it? And we think about the stature of the courses that you're mentioning now, and thinking about those days of someone like you as kids, you and your group of mates just hitting a ball around. I did it at Wentworth Falls. That was my backyard, quite literally, similar to yours, but it wasn't the Sandbelt. We're talking about the most prestigious courses in the country.
Well, you're probably right. But again, as a kid, you don't see that. And you obviously could play golf because you're mixing with golfers that were better, so you get better. But you did all these things and you never thought you were doing the wrong thing. And no one really went crook at you, because when I was at Huntingdale, we used to play 2 or 3 holes down Huntingdale, jump across the fence and play 3 or 4 holes in Metro and come back. It was what, I don't know, it's what the kids did in those days. And I don't know whether we were encouraged or no one cared, but I can never remember being told off and said, get out of here and whatever you're doing, away you went. But anyway, getting back into the story. So moving on from there with this architecture and the love of plans and things like that, I was lucky then I didn't finish my becoming an architect because I wanted to be a golfer and my father wanted me to be an architect, as I've mentioned. But I joined Peninsula Golf Club as a trainee professional under a guy called Brian Smith, and his father was Martin Smith, who was a well-known golfer and a very good player. And whilst we were at Peninsula Golf Club, they undertook, because they got access of a bunch of land from one of the members, and they went from having this 9-hole short golf course and an 18-hole major golf course. They decided to build a new clubhouse and build a 36-hole complex. And I spent many hours or time with Sloane Morther walking around, talking about things, not really knowing what I was doing or what I was talking about. But I can remember being given sketches that he used to do and things like that. Unfortunately, they're all long gone, and I don't know where they went. But that was really the introduction to doing something with the world of golf. And from there on, I had this drive that I wanted to do something with golf. So, from Kingston Heath, one looks at the golf course today, which is on a basically flat, pretty normal piece of dirt, and it's magnificent. But down at Peninsula Golf Club, the land mass moved up and down and across the hills and things like that, and was totally different. So when I left Peninsula Golf Club, and I was obviously a reasonably golfer because I won the trainee championships in 1966 at another great golf course, Spring Valley, which was across the road literally from Kingston Heath. I decided I wanted to play golf tournaments. But unfortunately, when I left to do that, the PGA of Australia and the Australian Golf Union had a bit of a hiccup, and there was a ban on golf professionals playing golf tournaments on golf courses controlled by the Golf Union. I think it lasted for 12 or 18 months. And so then I decided, well, what am I going to do? And then one starts to look at becoming a golf professional and things of that nature. So the way into becoming a golf professional, you have to apply for the job, you go and have the interview, and if you get the job, then you're off and running. And so I applied with Kingston Heath and got the job. And funny thing, when the president of the golf club was also a member of Peninsula Golf Club, which apparently, unbeknownst to me, I used to go out and play a few holes with him late in the afternoon and things of that nature. So one of the things in life is that you make sure that you never collapse any of those bridges that you've walked across, because there'll always be someone who'll come along and either hinder you or help you based on the way you've treated people. And most golf pros are pretty outgoing, they're pretty friendly, they're pretty easy to deal with, and they like doing what they're doing. So one became the professional at Kingston Heath. I just played golf tournaments. In fact, when I became the professional and did the interview there, they wanted me to make sure that I continued playing golf tournaments. Whereas today, I think that if you became a golf pro, I think the last thing the member wants, the committee wants, is the golf ball running off playing golf tournaments. But in those days,
it's funny because I've done a piece on Dan Suter's history, and I look at the way that he used to work and the tournaments that they would play, and even later on, like you just talked about, how a professional was often, well, the way that it was, that my understanding is that you were based at a golf club to represent them on the tournaments and things that you went on the road and played at and competed in.
Yeah,
whereas, like you said, now when a golf club employs a pro, I'm not saying this is right, wrong, or indifferent, but when a golf club in the modern world of golf employs a resident club professional, it's for their members. You're there to, I guess, in essence, you're there to sort of service the membership and assist and teach. And exactly, that's what it is. So it's a far cry from what it once was, where you had to be based somewhere and representing that club. And I've seen it looking back in the history books. Like I said, it was, there were resident clubs. Charlie Campbell was based at Lura back in the 1920s and 1930s. And that was their base. And he's competing in the Australian Open, but representing Lura Golf Club. And that seems, you go, wow, it's a guy in the Oz Open coming out of Lura? Really?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But Lura was a very notable golf course in New South Wales in that era, in the 20s and 30s.
It was a lot of the mountains ones. Wentworth Falls was, with obviously Dan Suter as the man behind the design. But I'm interested. You were the Kingston Heath part. You told me many moons ago that you were professional at Kingston Heath. I'm like, Kingston Heath, wow, Ted is a pro. And I've got the history book of Kingston Heath, and I flick through the pages to the professional section, and there's Ted Stirling, and I go, right, okay, he's in the book. That's a pretty big deal.
Well, look, it goes back. We digress again for a minute, because when I was 10 years of age, we had the Olympic Games in Melbourne, and just after that, they had the World Cup, or in those days it was called the Canada Cup, with Peter Thompson and Kel Nagle representing Australia, which in fact they won. And in that era, or that period of time, there was an exhibition match played at Kingston Heath, and I don't know how old I was, and I can't tell you what year it was, but it was certainly in the 50s. But I remember going to Kingston Heath, and there was Stan Ledden from Canada. There was Peter Thompson. There was Mike Shushak from the United States, America, and I presume the fourth guy was Kel Nagle. I can remember walking across the fairways thinking how good the grass was, and I can remember the smell, and looking at the bunkers and all these sort of things. And I obviously was in love with this ambience that the game of golf delivers, and it continues to this day. And why I became a golf course designer, I've got no idea, except I suppose, the architectural thing, the business of like moving the soil around, the business of being able to read and understand aerial photographs and contours. It's all part of the same deal, I think. And the call to do those things, it's part of like the development of the person as a golfer, because I never had any intentions of being a golf course designer, builder, or owning golf courses, but that's what one did. We went on to, I say we because I've been involved with another golf pro, and we've built golf courses, owned golf courses, maintained golf courses, sold golf courses. It's just, I don't know, it's just part of the journey that one has been lucky enough to participate in.
And there's a lot, like we said before, there's a lot to that. There's a lot in detail in that, and we'll probably talk a little bit about some of those courses soon as we go through the conversation. But like you said, you're coming out of Melbourne, you're also playing in time. You started playing other tournaments, I think, didn't you? And you're traveling around a little bit more, and you come to New South Wales. How did you get to New South Wales?
Well, I remember coming to New South Wales. I presume it must have been just after I won the junior trainees thing, because I came and played the Old Lakes Golf Club in a tournament, which I just thought was just out of this world. Not better or worse than Melbourne, but just out of this world, because it was a dunesy golf course. It was open to the wind. There wasn't basically any trees on it. And then I also played the next week at the Australian Golf Club, and it had no trees on it. And the old Australian Golf Club, which was full of dunes and basically treeless, was simply one of the greatest golf courses I'd ever seen.
Don't tell too many people
coming
about
out of Melbourne. So
don't tell too many people about the Aussie that had no trees and all dunes and everything compared to what it is today. We'll just leave that alone.
Well, I think that the love of that was because, as you're growing and you're reading golf books and architectural books, and you look at things like St Andrews, and to be honest, every golf course in some way, shape or form is a copy of St Andrews Golf Club or golf course. And so to go to a place like Australian Golf Club out of Melbourne, where there was no trees, the wind blew all day long, and you had all these wastelands and things like that. To me, it was just like what I expected St Andrews would be later when I had the opportunity to visit it.
Yeah.
So, it's part of the journey, and I think that it's a bit like a round of golf. You just don't know what it's going to lead you to and what you're going to experience. I mean, obviously you're going to have a couple of bogeys along the way, but hopefully you make up with it with a few birdies and enjoy your little trip. But
indeed, and there's I think you talked about before about the not with the intention of going to become an architect or build golf courses and the like, but you talk about the enjoyment, I suppose, and the fascination within that. There is a bit of I find there's a drug to that. There's that feeling of, I don't know, I don't even know really how best to describe it, but when I was at Katoomba, and part of that was with your time, part of it was after you had finished up and moved on, there's a feeling of creating a landscape, but it's knowing that you're creating it within the landscape that it's sitting, that you're going to then enjoy an incredible pastime and sport in many different forms around that space at the same. It's a really combination of so many different things when you're building a golf course, when you're designing it on the ground. And like you said, it's your eyes, it's how things look and how it feels. If it doesn't feel right, you massage it till it does. Yeah, and you can't do that with a plan.
No, the plan is just like the lead pencil. It's the lead inside the little container that holds it. The thing with golf course design is that, and I've always been in love with doing the complete project. So you walk onto a virgin site, and I've done it probably 100 times, of which probably only about 3% ever develop into a golf course because of other factors that rear their head along the way. But I've always liked the raw landscape, the raw screen that you can sort of work towards. And I've also had the ability to stand in a site and look at it, and I can see the finished product. And because I see the finished product, I know how to work to get to that point. And just about everyone I've worked with, doesn't seem to be able to have that insight, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, irrelevant. But I used to have lots of battles because I'd say, now we're going to do this because it's going to like this. Oh, no, it won't work like that. But eventually it does because that's the way I am. And I think the other thing is that there's a passion for this game of golf. I mean, you take the golf course superintendent, you take the club professional, you take the amateur at the golf club who plays off scratch and wins the club championship. You take the lady golfer that plays every ladies' day and wins half the events. There is some inherent passion for this game of golf, and whether it's a drug or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I've spent my whole life in this game of golf, and I continue to today. And I'm just as passionate today as I was, 50 years ago, or should I say 60 years ago, or whatever it may be. And we all remember, you remember when you had someone gave you your first 7-iron or your first driver, or someone gave you a box of brand new golf balls, or they gave you a glove, and all these little things. They're still there in the back of the mind. And I can remember at Peninsula Golf Club walking across the site with Sloane Morthorpe, who I didn't know him really. He's just a guy that was doing the work. And he would talk about things, and I'd look at what he's talking about and watch the thing grow. And I thought that was pretty good. I thought it was pretty cool, actually. And in those days, it was a hands-on thing. A lot of workers, they had, I suppose, what you'd call antiquated machinery. Like it's something you couldn't use today, but it worked, and they had all the time in the world to produce the product. There was no quick fix to say, now you've got to open within 12 months or 18 months or whatever it may be. And I can remember later in life when these golf courses were being constructed, the rule of thumb was always you had to have 2 growing seasons, maybe 3 to make it better before the first ball was struck. Well, 2 growing seasons 12 months after it's finished, after it's grassed, after the grassing. So I don't know how you could do that today, but
I don't think you can. And like you said, using the equipment that they had, the rudimentary tractors and bulldozers, the very early editions of the Caterpillars and things like that we see, or basic just tractors with pulling machinery and lots of things done by hand. It's a totally different world, different time frame. Everything is very different now. I just did a podcast with Nathan Bradbury from Golf Spectrum, and Concord was done in 6 months.
Yeah, well,
18 holes. I mean, we're talking insane timeframes, and it's because of what's able to be done and an expectation from people. But it was a very, very different world, and a lot of things, like you said, there's a lot in that. There's a lot in what goes on in constructing and building golf courses and how it functions.
Yeah, and the machinery, I think, dictates the way you do things. It's a bit like the way the machinery, which we call golf clubs, dictates the way they hit the golf ball today. I mean, it's just a transition. I mean, you look at places like Royal Melbourne and Kingston Heath, and they used horses dragging the shovel behind them, but it was the footprint of the horse that created the shape of the bunker and the support of the bunker. And everyone raves about how great the bunkers are at Royal Melbourne, but that's because the horses did it. But you can't do that today. It could have taken 3 days, 4 days, 5 days to do one bunker.
It took whatever it took.
Yeah, it took whatever it took until we got on to the next one. And in that process, of course, the Alistair Mackenzies of the world, whoever it may be, they're looking at it, they're watching it, and they're deciding that, that's the shape we now want. And away they went. And Melbourne's become world famous. It's become a real mecca for, golf, and the Melbourne Sandbelt, because it's just a sandy, loamy piece of material that just lends itself to easy construction, and they're just blessed. I mean, but with that said, if you look at the Lakes Golf Club today and you look at the Australian Golf Club today, the material that's on is fantastic as well. Except now, they've got trees and all that sort of business, and they've Americanized it. Now, whether that's right or wrong, good or bad, it's not my place to argue and force someone to believe it is or it isn't, because if you like what you've got and you remember at the place and you love that golf course, then it's right. It works.
100% agree. It's personal taste and personal preference, and some people, like sweet desserts, and some people like savoury desserts, and that's that's how I look at it. It's personal taste. Now, Ted, we talked about a lot of the fascination in that, and a lot of your background there in in your design and your golf, and we've heard a lot. There's a great deal in that, and I'm sure that's another podcast in itself, if I'm being honest, in depth with some of the early days and the early people that you met and tournaments you played and the like. And I want to skip through a little bit because it'll end up before our podcast, and I think it'll take people a week to listen to, but and we could talk for that long too, by the way. But we jump back to Katoomba. When I started Katoomba and we got to know each other and we were working together, I got to pick your brains because for me, architecture was this real passion and fascination that I had, along with being a superintendent, a first-time posted there and working on a golf course and building up a product and a layout for people to enjoy. We're going through changes. I wanted to know more about architecture, and through chatting with you, and I'd spoken to Edgar Oakman previously, and I grew up with him living across the road from me. He's a former well-known professional within New South Wales, and I got to pick his brains about a lot of his golf and where he used to travel to and golf courses in general. Then chatting to you, you're the first architect for me that I'd really come face-to-face with. So I was so grateful you spent a lot of time with me explaining to me a lot of the ins and outs about how golf courses come to be. I'm sitting there, a lot of the stories were it started, then it stopped. Or that, and I'm sitting there going, it can't be right, because we hear all the fanfare about these wonderful golf courses. And, I'd spend an afternoon, I'd go over to your house and sit down with your wife, Kath, and we'd have a tea until you got home. And then we'd open up, photographs, and you'd show me Bonneville and you'd show me Riverside Oaks. And so these are some of the places that you were part of in their time. But I wanted to just start off with the early days of the Society of Australian Golf Course Architects, because you were involved with how that came to be, weren't you?
Yeah, I went to the annual general meeting of the group of Golf Course Superintendents Association, and it was 1988 at the Hilton Hotel in Sydney. And unbeknownst to me, there was a couple of other characters there that I knew, and one of them was a guy called Ted Parslow. And Ted Parslow and I and myself, we were both junior members at Huntingdale Golf Club. And I got to talk to Ted Parslow, and there was a couple of other guys there that I really didn't know much about. And they said, "Oh, look, we hear you like to build golf courses and play around with golf courses and all this sort of business, and we're thinking of forming up a group called the Society of Australian Golf Course Architects." And I said, "Oh, yeah, that sounds good. That's something we could do. That people like ideas." And look, there was a guy called Bob Green there, and he was a conventional architect, but he was building golf courses and altering golf courses and doing things like that. And look, there was just a group of guys, and we all put our hand up, and I think there was 4 of us or 5 of us at the time, and it just started from there. And I think the first meeting we had was the next year, 1989, and all the guys involved were guys that were just out there in the industry doing their own thing, getting jobs all different ways, because they might have known the guy on the council who wants to build a public golf course, or they might have known a guy like Kerry Packer that wanted to build a golf course up the road somewhere. And that's how it all sort of started, because there's no uniformity about how a golf course starts. You just have to be Johnny on the spot or know the guy who wants to do this. And in that period, in that 80s, we were being inundated with the Americanization of golf. And one of them was, of course, houses around a golf course. Yep. And so there was a number of golf courses being developed up and down the East Coast. And that's how it all basically started. Look, it's just one of those things. It's just a bunch of like guys, and away you go. So that thing started. We would have a meeting twice a year, and we'd talk about different things about, in those days, how close can you have a house to the centre line of a fairway, and, why the clubhouse should go there instead of up on the top of the hill, and all these sort of just things that people, just like ordinary architectural skills, just like trying to build a house. Do you put a pitch roof in, or do you put a flat roof in? And of course, most of these guys all had a passion for golf, and they said, "Oh, you can't do that. You must have your bunker this way." Then I'd come in and say, "No, you've got to have it like that." And Ted Parslow come in and say, "No, it's got to be, on the side of the hill." And, that's the sort of thing that a group of guys with like ideas get together, and that's how it started. and
And
it's continued today. It's still
so
going.
It is. It's recognised as the national body, as the Society of Australian Golf Course Architects. It's still operating today. And Harley Cruz is the president. I've had Harley on the podcast before, and it's been going for what's that, 40 or 30 something years thereabouts. And like you said, it was a group of peers getting together. The things from forming that type of a group means you get more recognition. You're able to talk, like you said, bounce ideas off, work together, build a recognised group of people and experts in the field, and move forward from there. And I suppose previous to that, like you said, you're kind of all on your own, apart from anyone you might have bumped into along the way. You're all on your own doing your own jobs. And part of being previous to the formation of that society is where I wanted to sort of pick up from you, because I know in chatting with you, and the time, like I said, I was at your place and sitting down with Kath for a cuppa, and you'd come home and we'd pull out the photographs and we'd start talking about Riverside Oaks. And here I am chatting to Ted Stirling at Katoomba that I'm working on and in part building with you, talking about you being part of or building the golf course at Riverside Oaks, which I'd played in junior events as a kid, looking at this worldly golf course. It was a trip down the Hawkesbury from the mountains. You'd come out and you go drive down through the bush, and all of a sudden it'd open up into this amazing, we'd seen it on television. What were the Australian PGA was there? Australian PGA Championship. I mean, it was this, for us as a kid in Western Sydney and sort of out in the Blue Mountains, this was a big deal. And I'm sitting down with you chatting about Riverside. Can you tell us and the listeners, Riverside Oaks is a famous golf course. How did it come to be? Because it wasn't Riverside Oaks previous to that. It was just a holiday theme park, if you like, as a lot of people remember it.
Let me just digress for 1 minute. Let me tell you that, look, all these guys that started the society, they're individualists. And I mean, I was quite happy to do what I did by myself. And guys like Ross Watson, who became the first president, is an individualist, gifted, and they just want to do their own little thing, but they want to get jobs because it creates a job for them, which means it creates money and it means that they can go on with things. Now, just going back to Riverside Oaks, look, I have a partner called Bruce Hodson, who's in the throes of building a golf course at Bathurst at the moment, and Bruce Hodson was a very good player. We became friends because of the game of golf on a professional level. And he rang me one day when I was at Manly Golf Club, and he said, look, a friend of mine's got a piece of dirt out on the Hawkesbury, and they tell me there used to be a golf course there, and it's up for sale. Anyway, we looked at the property, and it was called Paradise Gardens. It was owned by Stafford Bullen from Bullen Circus. And Stafford and I actually, for some reason, we knew each other somewhere in the past, and we went and visited Stafford. And Stafford was the chairman of the circus. He was also one of the chairmen. There was two chairmen of Channel 10 in those days, and he was also chairman of a company in England that ran fun parks and things like that. So Paradise Gardens, they decided they had enough and they wanted to sell. So without going into all the detail, Bruce and I bought the property. It was about 600 acres. It was called Bungool. There was a golf course and it was called Bungool. And that was built, I think, in about 1961, 62 or 63 by a golf professional who was the pro at Camaray Golf Club. And when we bought it, we were thinking about building a 9-hole golf course, but we kept the fun park going. And the fun park was a cash flow, was a source of income. So we progressed to the point that we decided, okay, we've got to build a golf course. And there was a guy called Jack Edwards, who was the leader of or the head of the fire brigade in that area, with Cat Eye or Maruya or whatever it was called in those days in that area. Anyway, he turned out to be the old greenkeeper from the original Bungool golf course.
Yeah, wow, what a find.
Yeah, so he said, look, I'll bring all the boys in. You supply half a dozen boxes of beer, and we'll burn the paddock from boundary to boundary, which they did.
I love it.
And because if you burn cooch, it goes ballistic. So we finished up with a cooch paddock, and we set about rebuilding a golf course based on, I suppose, the areas where the original fairways, or some of the fairways, did exist in the old days. And we opened the golf course and it was called Hawkesbury Valley Golf Club. Now, prior to us buying Paradise Gardens, it ran as Bungool Golf Course, Hawkesbury Valley Golf Course, and Paradise Gardens Golf Course. But so we renamed it as Hawkesbury Valley Golf Course. We got a golf club formed. We became part of the Hawkesbury Valley District Golf Association. We had members, and they'd come and stay overnight with caravans and pitch a tent, and it was unbelievable. It was actually the best experience we've ever had. But we set about building a golf course, and we employed a guy called Billy Allen, who was also known as Bill Carlin, and he was a wizard in terms of using the tools and the machinery. He did his time and was also the golf course superintendent at Kalara, and he was a very gifted individual. Difficult, hard to work with, but a genius. And so the golf course proceeded, and we reached a point where we had the 18 holes and everyone was playing golf and all this sort of business. And we got introduced to a chap who wanted to buy it because he wanted to build, the biggest, best golf club there is. And his name was Graham Beach. And we eventually ended up selling the project after the golf course was, let's say, half completed to the standard you see today. So that was all done by John Bruce and Partners prior to this company called Golf Design Australia. And that's how it happened. Now, how did the golf holes develop? How did we decide to put the bunker here, there, and everywhere else? Well, the answer to that is I don't know.
Don't give away all your secrets.
Well, there's no secrets. I would walk out and I would just look at the lay of the land, and if the land was lower on the left and higher on the right, it looked like a dog leg from right to left. And do you put a bunker in the corner to make the hole longer, or do you put the bunker on the right to make it shorter? And golf was always about risk and reward. So once the Americans came in and took the initial concept that all your hazards were between you and the flag and pushed them all down to the rough side, then all the bunkering became a different kettle of fish to the way the golf hole played. So now that doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just the way the process was. So, we built Riverside Oaks physically by ourselves. We got scrapers in and dug dams. In fact, there's a dam. There's a par 3 green, I think, which is a chipping green now, which is looking north out of the clubhouse. And I think the dam is 20 metres deep. And it had 20 metres deep, and it had straight sides. And we used to use these D9s to drag the scrapers out and drag things out. But the point of the water hazard was to produce material.
Yes.
Because in those days we would use 2,000 cubic metres of clay as your sub-base and your surrounds. So you have 2,000 cubic metres multiplied by 18 or 19 because of a practice putting green, and that's the material you had to work with. And we would have moved in excess of 1 million cubic metres of material in that period of time. It took us about 2.5 years to the stage of grassing. And there was no thought about, well, we've got to build it within 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years or whatever. You just did what you had to do. So that's the way it worked. And look, I used to draw the plans up and I'd measure the things and try and work out safety issues and things like that, because later in life I became a registered expert witness in the Australian courts, and it was to do with anything to do with golf courses. And of course, a lot of that stuff I was feeling my way and learning my way with Riverside Oaks as to where you could put things and what was safe and what wasn't. So again, it's a learning exercise. I just did it myself. I just worked out what works and what doesn't, and that was it.
Put a rule of thumb there that you felt was appropriate, and whether distance between the holes or green to tee distance for safety and all those sorts of things as you're laying out the golf course. Now, I'm curious about the golf course itself a little bit more, if you can remember those days a little bit. Now, from memory, when I was chatting with you, and this is before the Bungool course as it is today was built on the riverside of Riverside Oaks, on the river banks, I should say, of Riverside Oaks, and the low area around the hillside, around the back. When I was a kid, that was the practice area, was over the other side of the roundabout, over the back. And
that was a property called Marymount.
That's correct. With the ruins are near the 17th tee of the Bungool course. So now it's a 36-hole golf course. It's in play, apart from the flood damage and so on. On that Bungool course. So you had the Ganguru course, as it's called today, was what was Riverside Oaks when it was a single course. Did you have the idea of having ultimately two courses on that golf facility?
There was always going to be a second course, but there was going to be no bunkers. There was just humps and mounds because we knew it flooded.
Is that the smart idea? You could assess that it was regularly going to go underwater, so we're not going to build sand?
Well, to give you an example, we talk about how bad the floods have been, in the last 6 or 7 months, but we started building the golf course, I think, in 1984 or 5, and we had a flood in 86, 87 and 88, 3 consecutive years, and everything went under. It was just a normal process. And the flood they've just had at Windsor, which has been pretty bad, is actually 8 metres lower than what the bad flood was. So it gives you an idea. But yes, we were always going to have 36 holes, but the Bungool golf course really should be the original one, because the original one is built on what was Bungool Golf Course. And the second golf course, which they call Bungool today, should have been called, call it whatever they like. But
I know what you mean, but I suppose that's marketing from the owners and however they choose to name them. But
they own it; they can decide what is appropriate, for sure. Yeah.
Indeed, there was a lot of plans in the early days, but you'd sold it on. You got to the 18, you got it up and going. Did that include the grand, extraordinary clubhouse that's there? Were you there in the time when the PGA was home there as well?
Oh yeah, because the golf, we were still finishing off the golf course that you see today for Graham Beach, Beach Corp, and the clubhouse, which actually sits on the original army shed, which was the clubhouse. I used to work in John Bruce's office. I had my office in John Bruce and Paterson, so I was contributing to the design of the underground parking and all that sort of business in his offices. It was just a work in progress. And you just do what you got to do. Someone says to me, "Oh, Ted, look, we've got to build a pro shop." What is a pro shop? What do you do? What do you do in a pro shop? Or, we need carts. How many carts do you need? And I just knew off the top of my head, well, you need 76 carts if everyone's going to play in a golf cart. And they were going to buy 4 golf carts and have a little shed, but I said, no, you need 76 if you're going to rotate them. Well, and how much water do you really need to water a golf course? Well, I said, well, if you want to put an inch of water on your golf course, you need to put 5 million gallons overnight. And, so that's how big the dam's got to be. Well, if the dam's going to be that big, that means we need a pump that's going to cost, twice as much. Well, but that's the way it is. And look, you read, you study, you ask questions, you talk, you get the information, you learn from people that know more than you and are better at it than you. And look, I'm not the best golf course designer or builder in the world, but I know I have an immense skill in doing certain things, and it's because I love doing it. And let me also say that if Graham Beach hadn't have bought it, and if Kerry Packer hadn't have had his World War III fight with the golf union, or the Australian Golf Union, today that would have been called the Sydney Country Club, and it would have been owned by Kerry Packer, because we had numerous meetings with him about buying it. He was going to have 100 members. They were all going to fly in and out with helicopters. There were going to be 100 houses, because when we were doing Riverside Oaks, Bruce and I got the first lateral strata title approved in New South Wales, which has allowed the housing that you see there today to be approved and to go ahead with, because it was really outside the council perimeters in terms of allowing, water, town water and sewage and things like that.
Yeah, right.
So it would be a different. I mean, today Elliston would have been Riverside Oaks.
I was going to say that
Yeah.
sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? That model of, private golf course exclusive. We've got Elliston that Kerry's done. We've got a similar concept at Cathedral Lodge now down in Victoria, which is along those similar lines, different owners, obviously. But it like I said, it was the home to the PGA.
We set that up with Graham Beach because that was our ultimate plan, to have it as the home of the Australian PGA. To have 2 golf courses, practice facilities, hotel, and I mean we started that and it did work. The PGA were housed there and home there for a number of years, but it changed when different people bought the property.
And you had the PGA, the Australian PGA Championship was held there as well.
Look, there was a number of 4-round tournaments there. I think there was 5 major 4-round tournaments there. There was a number of them. I can't even remember what they were called now, but there was a number of them. And let me just say that had Kerry Packer not got involved with cricket, because I knew Kerry Packer he used to come and have a few lessons off me when I was at Manly Golf Club. So we were on talking terms, and I knew him from years ago. In fact, when I first went to Sydney, I was billeted in a house with a bunch of people, including Terry Smith and Tom Ramsey, and we lived opposite his father's house. And so we used to run into him often in Victoria Road, Bellevue Hill. So we became friends. And I do have a story about Kerry Packer, which I was asked to participate in a match against him, but that's another story. So
we'll probably leave that one alone for the late.
We'll leave that one alone. But it was good fun. It was part of the cycle of life, and it's part of golf. I loved it.
Indeed. So another project that's a famous name, golf course that a lot of people in Australia know about, that you were a part of, again, the start of it and building that golf course was Bonville Golf Resort up at Coffs Harbour. Yeah. And tell us a little bit about that project, because a lot of this stuff, look, I'll be honest, if we Google, these places, there's no history. The history's been wiped, and it's through different owners over the years. The internet was formed a long way after they were open, and it's easy to not have that history put in because it wasn't around. Your name isn't part of that, because these are all projects well before that's not extensively documented online and published online. They're in books. I've seen your name in the books. Like I said, Kingston Heath and that sort of stuff. So can you tell us a bit about Bonville? It seems like an odd one. Because
not really. Look, it was just a typical way the things works. There's a guy called Terry Watson. Terry Watson started out to be a golf pro. He did his traineeship with Bobby Richards at Warringah Golf Club. And I knew him in those days. And then he became a golf course superintendent. And he went to Coffs Harbour for me to build Opal Cove, which was a tourist resort, 9-hole golf course. And I designed and oversaw the construction of Opal Cove. And Terry Watson put the thing on the ground. And Terry was a genius. You could just say to him, now, this is what we want to do, blah, blah, blah. And he'd just go off and do it. So
there's a skill in that, isn't there? There's a skill in having someone, a shaper, someone who can work the machinery. Yeah. I had one in the later years after you'd moved on from Katoomba. I had a couple of different operators, and talking to them about what I wanted to build and how I wanted it to work. Some got it, and those that got it, it's just like they're an extension of your hand. Like they could understand what you were saying. And those that didn't get it, it was like watching a 3-year-old build a Lego model of an excavator and try and maneuver it all with finesse. You just can't do it.
Well, today the best guy on a machine is Darby Mueller from Golf Shapes. And the secret with him and Terry is that they were both golf course superintendents. So even though I might wanted to do something, they would argue, no, you can't do that because we can't maintain it. The angle's too hard or whatever it is. And so these guys put the thing in the ground based on what you wanted, but they did it the way that they wanted to do it to make it work. So Terry built this 9-hole golf course up at Coffs Harbour called Opal Cove. And while he was up there, we got involved with a lot of projects because Bruce Hodgson and I were doing a resort up there, and we bought the local airport, not the main one, the second one. We bought the zoo, we bought land, and we were going to do a major golf course and housing estate, and Terry Watson was going to do the construction with it. But in the process, we met a guy called Bob Johnson, and Bob Johnson owned then what was the Big Banana, which was Australia's biggest tourist resort in up the coast, but it was also the biggest tourist resort in Australia. And somewhere along the line, he got involved with the Japanese, and they did some deal because they wanted to buy the big banana. And he said, look, I'll sell you the big banana on one proviso. That is that you give me the money to build a golf course. I've got the land down the road, blah, blah, blah. And that's how the deal was struck. So from there, where the land is today was reforested land owned by the Australian paper mills, which in turn was bought by Bob Johnson's mother. So it was Bob Johnson's mother's land. And he set about building this thing called Bonville. And when I say building it, he asked me to come in and start and do the mapping and the design work and the concept of it. And Terry was going to be the man on the ground, and Terry was exemplary. I mean, Terry just did marvellous work. But look, within about 6 weeks of Terry and I on site, and they're chopping down trees and shaping the fairways, we get a visit from the council, unbeknownst to us, that Bob Johnson had no approvals to do anything. And we're in there, bloody chopping trees down and changing creeks and moving
now,
this.
I'll jump in. It should be noted that because when you go to Bonville, and it's considered the Augusta of Australia, probably a good name to throw in there now in the lead up to Augusta in a few days, but it's a beautiful location, tall timbers, dramatic landscape, lots of serious movement on the side of the mountain effectively. But this is, it's like you said, it was a former plantation site. It's not. It wasn't virgin bushland. It wasn't national park. You could easily walk into Bonville today and assume it was carved out of national park. It was a plantation paper forest, wasn't it? It
was pretty thick when we used to. I mean, when we walked the site, Terry would be like 20 metres in front of me or behind me. We'd be yelling out to each other because we couldn't bloody see each other. But we worked out what you could do and what you couldn't do, what was going to work, both physically and visually most importantly. And Terry put the product on the ground. I mean, I could never have got Bonville to the state that it was when it was open without Terry. Terry was a master at his craft and a great bloke. And he was the guy that moved the soil around. He got all the guys together that built the bunkers, shaped the tees and greens and things like that. There was problems like everything else. There wasn't enough money at certain times to do the complete correct subsurface building of the greens or some of the greens, and that had to be addressed later in life. But what you see today is really the original plans, and unfortunately all the aerial photographs, all the sketches and plans did go missing from John Bruce and Partners, which I just believe to this day that Graham Beach, who took on the ownership of Riverside Oaks, scarpered with, and I don't think they're around anymore. It's as simple as that. So there's very little evidence as to how it progressed and things like that, but there was many photographs taken, all documented on the back. It was a series that you could have just walked through it and seen everything that went on, but that wasn't the case. Now, Bob Johnson, after about 6 or 8 months of all this, Bob Johnson went missing, and I don't know what happened, but there was a conflict between he and the Japanese owners, and then they were left with, what do we do now? And the golf course hadn't been completed, but we continued working. So they had to sort of form another company. They had to get something that was going to work, and they employed a guy called Tom Lindsay from Lindsay Transport, who was a great bloke, and he took over the running of the company, and the golf course construction and building continued. And what you see is the finished product. In terms of like planning and contours, look, they're all just all done by hand on the ground, working out what was going to work, what was going to be great, what wasn't going to be great. A good example is the first hole where the creek meanders across in different angles. And when Terry was doing it, Terry said, "Oh, look, we'll fill that in. I don't think that really works." Blah, blah. And I said, "No, I think that's great. I think that the way it cross sections the fairway, it splits the hole. It allows the big hitter to have a risk and reward shot and the lesser player to come up to it." So what you see today is an argument between Terry and I, which I just happened to win that one, but I didn't win them all.
Good on you.
Yeah. I better just finish by saying a couple more things.
Okay.
With all the conversation we're talking about building and all this business about golf courses, The thing that I forgot to mention, which is important, is that there's an awful lot of documentation that has to be given to councils and all these instrumentalities that have their finger in the pie these days. And so you have to submit working drawings, you have to submit contour drawings, and they go to council for approval, and things like the grasses you're going to use and the trees you want to plant and things like that are all part of the documentation. The problem that I have, and I've been through it a number of times, is I've met with councils and discussed the golf course concepts, and there's no one in there that can read the concepts.
They haven't got a clue.
They've got no idea what you're talking about. And the other thing one must say is that to build and design a golf course is an artistic endeavour. It is not a
it's
landscaping
not like building,
endeavour.
Well, it's not like building a building. It's not like building a road. It's not.
No.
It's more akin to building a garden.
Yeah.
And even then, and I can say that because I've done that as well. But it's a form of art. So we hear about. I can mention it because I've heard about it in so many places. And if you read up or you hear people like Tom Doak talk about it, or Gil Hant, some of these big architecture names around the world, let alone the Harley Crews of the world, the Bob Harrisons of Australia, the Mike Claytons that we hear about, they will say the same thing, that even though councils are wanting these things, like you said, it comes down to your eyes. And we hear shapers talk about it. We hear architects talk about it. It's what you see on the ground that feels right, because it's an art form. This isn't, you're not building a road to a construction method that's got to meet at this intersection at these levels with this drainage, so traffic can do that because we measured it by this based around how many people come through each day and how much rain's going to fall. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't function that way. It's a living space. And I struggle I learned a lot of this chatting to you, talking to peers, visiting golf courses, traveling around playing different things. You start to understand that a plan, it can't work. It's not possible to bring the best out of a golf course design if you draw it on a plan, on a computer or in an office, because it's going to get massaged on the ground.
Yeah, it's a guideline.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is. It's a guide.
Yeah, I mean, one would consider today that if you consider Kingston Heath, and the bunkers went in 5 years after the golf course was finished on purpose so that they could work out where the best spot to put them. But if you present that to a council today and say, look, we're going to build a golf course, we're going to have 400 bunkers, but we're not going to build the bunkers for 5 years, and we're not going to tell you what we're going to do because we're not sure. What would they say to you? I mean, it's ludicrous. But
just write a big question mark on a piece of A4 paper and give it to them and go, "That's our bunker plan," or "That's how it's going to."
Every project is different, and you do have to do the best you can and allow these people to be given correct answers to allow them to say yes, let's go ahead with it. That this is going to work and things like that, because it's a two-way street as well. So. Anyway, it's been a very interesting journey playing around with dirt, clay, soils,
and
trees.
And I wanted to touch on as well. You talked about the discussions. That no doubt there was some heated discussions between you and Terry there, wandering around Bonneville and making those landforms work and the golf holes work around that layout, the concept that you had. That relationship between architect, designer, and shaper, course builder, that's got to be a pretty strong relationship, but one that has a lot of communication so that you do get the best result, right?
Yeah, look, I've had the ability as a golf pro to just take people as they are, and I just treat everyone the same. And sure, we had arguments with Bonneville and things like that, but we had a great system with that. Whoever lost the bet had to buy the dinner, so it worked pretty well. the bottle of red wine and the spaghetti, that was the prize, you see.
That's pretty good, but it equals, it comes about from those discussions on the ground, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's how some of the quirks become talking points, and the talking points become memorable parts of a golf course as well.
Yeah, look, anyone who's going to build a golf course today and doesn't use golf course superintendents in any way, shape or form, they're kidding themselves, because the golf course superintendent is the expert in that field. He knows what he's got to do. He knows how hard it's going to be to maintain, and he will. And Darby talks to me every day about things like this, and we've done a lot of stuff together, Darby and I, and we argue. But he basically always wins because he and his style as a golf course superintendent in the past, he's the guy that's got to keep the grass growing. He's the guy that's got to maintain it. So you've got to go by him, even though I want it the other way, maybe. But look, it's a great source to have someone like him on board and part of the team.
And does that throw back to the days of Royal Melbourne with Alistair McKenzie and Mick Moorcock?
Well, it certainly does, but it goes back to old Tom Morris. He was the first guy.
He was all of them.
Yeah, he's the guy that started. He's the guy that put the seashells on the what with the greens, and the greens grew better. So that sort of concept is still the same today, except it's more complex. You got to go to school. You got to learn all things about chemistry and all that sort of business. I have a son that went to Denmark as a golf course superintendent. So he's Australian, speaks English, goes to Denmark. All the chemicals are in Latin. He has to write in Danish and he has to speak in Danish, and he's over there building and changing golf courses. So work that one out.
Yeah, wow.
That's beyond me. So I don't know, but anyway.
Well, look, Ted, you've had a long career in golf. That's been your life. It's been fascinating to hear some of those stories, how you got through into the industry of golf course design, your part you played in the early days of the Society of Australian Golf Course Architects, and also the part you had to play in some of the well-known golf courses we just touched on in Riverside Oaks and Bonneville. And it's a fascinating insight into that world as well, which I wanted to be able to bring out to the audience, because it's something that you guys as architects and builders and shapers and designers are long gone by the time we're out playing golf on those fairways.
Absolutely.
So it's a realm that is very hard to see inside of, and we're starting to see more of it now in the world of social media because it's easy to share pictures and videos and the like. But back in your day, like you said, those plans, I don't know, you've showed me some of the older stuff from Bonneville in the past, and like you said, they're long since gone as well. But it's, unless you've got the hard copies, they don't exist anymore. It's a memory.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a great pity, but that's what happens, I suppose. They could have got damage in a flood. They could have got damage in a fire, but in this case, they were borrowed anyway. Look, let me just say one more thing. This industry is about two things. One is a passion for golf, and you've got to practice like hell, and that's it.
There you go. Words, wise words. Well said.
Yeah.
Well, Ted, look, I thank you greatly for your time on the podcast. I hope I'm sure everyone's enjoyed it. I've enjoyed going down some of those stories from our time at Katoomba as well, and hearing a lot of your backstory and some of those past projects. So thank you for your time. Look, I'm sure there could be another podcast in this. There's plenty of stuff to talk about. And we'll probably work on having you back one day. But look, Ted Stirling, thank you very much for being part of the Golfing Greenkeeper podcast, and wonderful insight. Appreciate your time.
And thank you for asking. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ted.
Bye-bye.
So I'm just going to come out with it. Did you enjoy that one? You can probably tell I certainly did. I hope you did too. A lot of reminiscing there from Ted and myself about our time up at Katoomba, and obviously a great discussion about Ted's past and some of the golf courses that he's been part of in his time building them, designing them, and all of the places he worked, along with how good was the stuff back in the early days of Peninsula Golf Club down there in Victoria, down in the Mornington with Sloane Morpeth, and he's just dropping around the courses that he used to play as a kid, Victoria, Royal Melbourne, Kingston Heath, and the like. It was, look, a great story. Ted's got a wealth of experience and knowledge, and I always love picking his brains about all sorts of things, and we certainly have a chat along the way. So look, guys, thank you very much for listening. Please like, share, subscribe. Pass this podcast around if you would be so kind, and please leave me a review on iTunes. Is the Apple platform where you can leave reviews around, which would be most appreciated. And I hope you enjoyed it. And don't hesitate to get in touch with me, comment, message, and the like. I always love having a chat, as I've mentioned, about all sorts of different things that we'll chat about on the podcast that I bring to you. So look, guys, as always, you hit them clean, we'll keep them green. enjoy the US Masters, and hopefully we'll see another piece of amazing golf history come out after the 4 days there at Augusta. Have yourself a lovely weekend, and I'll catch up with you next week.